Welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. I'm Nik Michael. Recent conversations in this series have moved through nearly every seat at the table, shaping a young adult's path forward. A guidance counselor helping families weigh college against alternative routes, an executive leadership coach sharpening interview readiness and career decision-making, a recruiter working both sides of the hire to match Gen Z talent with the right fit, a family therapist helping parents and their kids navigate the emotional weight of the college and career decision together, and an HR professional who sees firsthand what actually gets someone hired. Each conversation has added a different vantage point on the same widening gap. Today's guest doesn't add another vantage point, he reframes the whole map. Somewhere between the college acceptance letter and the first day of a career that was supposed to begin on schedule, something has gone quiet. Not broken exactly, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone realizes the plan they memorized doesn't apply anymore. That's the space today's guest lives in, and it's the space this episode is built to open up. Shirish Agarwal wrote a book that doesn't ask how we prepare Gen Z for the workforce. It asks something harder. What happens when the workforce Gen Z prepared for no longer exists? His book, Gen Z to Gen Zero, makes a case that's tough to sit with. The entry-level job market wasn't disrupted, it was redesigned. And the clearest sign of that redesign is the one most people haven't named yet. The first rung of the ladder, the entry-level role that used to be given, isn't just hard to reach, it's gone. An entire generation is standing at the base of a career ladder, missing the very step they were told to expect first. That's exactly the gap this series exists to explore. The distance between what young adults were promised and what they're actually finding when they arrive. Shirish takes us somewhere our other guests haven't gone yet. He's not talking about resilience or mindset in isolation. He's talking about structure, about AI, about apprenticeship quietly disappearing, and about what it actually takes to build a career when that first rung is no longer there to stand on. In Gestalt therapy terms, this is a contact boundary disturbance. At a generational scale, an entire cohort reaching for a familiar figure against a ground that has shifted underneath them. Today, we talk about what that shift really looks like, what young people are grieving, and what gets built in its place. I'm Nik Michael, and this is Pivot Point Strategy for Change. Good morning. Welcome, Shirish. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Yourself?
Great to see you. I'm very excited to get started today. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? A loss, a new path, or an awakening that forced you to rewrite your life? Pivot Point is a podcast that explores those stories. I'm Nik Michael. We'll dive into how pain can spark growth and how crisis leads to clarity. Subscribe to Pivot Point today. Welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. I'm Nik Michael. Today's guest is Shirish Agarwal, and I want to welcome you, Shirish. Thank you very much for joining us on Pivot Point.
Thanks for having me, Nik.
On this podcast, we talk about pivot points, the moment when the old strategy no longer works. What do you think that moment looks like for today's young adults?
So I think if we're talking from a, let's say, Gen Z and job perspective,
yes,
I think things have massively changed in a very, very short period of time. And actually, I'll go as far as saying it's literally only over the last year, we're starting to see this change because, if you think about AI, it's still a relatively new phenomenon. And the first year and a half up until like 2023, 24, it was just starting to take off. And now the classic entry-level job that Gen Zs would gravitate towards has all but disappeared. So I think for Gen Zs especially, this is probably one of those unusual occasions where actually we have it better than the Gen Zs.
The kids coming up, yeah. I want to highlight, this is your book and you've written it. It is so well written. I'm so impressed, and everyone that I'm speaking to about it, and the data that you have, the information you have, you come from a very unique perspective. Your book argues that the entry-level job market wasn't disrupted, it was redesigned. Tell us what the difference is.
Sure. So if you think about before and after, before would be really even 2 years ago. Let's say a classic industry that's being disrupted is legal. And obviously it's a very coveted role. You want to start off as a intern, paralegal, solicitor, partner. And earlier it was that, yeah, you would start off as a paralegal. You would carry out you would help basically the tasks you would help with, such as research, such as contract review. These are the ones that actually AI has already taken over. So the reason I said it has evolved is I think what has happened now is the entry level job, if you will, for a paralegal isn't really at the bottom anymore. So that is why you need to demonstrate some experience, and you'll probably not start off at the bottom rung. You're starting off slightly one level higher because the bottom rung is all automation and AI and systems working. So that's what I meant, that it's actually all rather than fully been eliminated.
Yeah, no, very well said. And
Mm.
I noticed that you, in your book, you move from different industries. What was the moment when you realized this wasn't a temporary labor market fluctuation, but an actual structural shift?
I'm not sure if there was a one particular moment, but I think probably if I had to, what comes close is when I started to see this change permeating from, let's say, legal and finance, because they were one of the first industries where companies invest a lot into R&D, innovation, new tech, and especially because of the sensitive nature of these industries. So, for finance, you're actually holding sensitive data. There's a lot of sensitive information that banks hold, and same goes for law. So those were the ones when I started to notice, based on research, based on a lot of, I work also with firms in the HR space through my agency, and I noticed that this starting to move into sectors that I'd never heard of earlier. Even something as small as, let's say, a HVAC company starting to move their starting to let go or reduce the time that their office manager is spending in lieu of automation, in lieu of systems. Through my agency, we've actually worked with some of these clients to help them automate, help them create these systems. So I think all those sort of data points, if you will, told me that I don't think this is just a trend by any means.
Yeah, you highlight the differences between what happened in eight and the other areas
Mm,
where jobs had been stalled because of the financial crisis and the
yeah.
housing market changes. I work with a lot of parents and I work with children who are in the age of Gen Z. And what are most parents still believing about careers that is no longer true? If you can speak to what parents' needs are right now, they have a lot of questions. They have beliefs about what it was like 20 and 30 years ago when we were all in school.
Mm.
What would you tell them now that they should be looking for?
So I think the first piece of advice, and again, I'm no recruitment expert, I want to be on, like, of course, but based on everything I've read, based on when I was carrying out, I did a lot of research for the book. And I'll say, if I was giving advice to parents, the first thing I'll say is, don't think that back in the day, let's say, I want my kid to be a lawyer. I want my kid to be, let's say, a lawyer, right? I will say that forget what was what was the status quo back in the day, or what was coveted, and now see, where do you think at this rate, where is it going? And obviously, you still have to take into account the child's proclivities, right? As a parent, you will know that, okay, my child probably, they're good at arts rather than science, or they're good at sports rather than business. So I think that's always going to be the first starting point. And then it's that, okay, find the sectors where you think it's least likely to be disrupted by AI. I don't think any sector or industry is not going to be impacted. And actually, just a side note, this is why I focus quite a bit on which industries to focus on, because I didn't want just this to be a theoretical book. So that is why I talked about specific industries. And I think, yes, that's the advice I would give, that match your child's interests with the type of industry sectors that are likely to be least impacted.
No, I hear you. It's a tough sell for some parents to accept a certain level of change
Mm.
that's going on in the world when they have a preconceived expectation about what they believe their children are capable of. And I think every parent sees their child as being more capable than others
Yes.
because they understand their potential. I'm going to give them that. That's a
Mm.
good thing. There's a sense of, do you believe that Gen Z right now is in a grieving process, given how AI has impacted things? And how would you describe it then?
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say they're actually grieving by any means, because I think they probably, and again, I'm massively generalizing, but just for the, purposes of this
Yes,
discussion,
yeah.
I think they still don't fully comprehend the impact that Gen Z is or will have on their job prospect. And the reason I say that specifically, this isn't just theoretical, but I have, during the research, I came across a lot of studies where Gen Z, okay, fair enough. They're moving away from that hustle culture and, work-life balance. And the thing is not wanting to do the jobs that they don't enjoy. Now, there's a balance to be had between, we can't always in life get to do what we love. I don't, very few have that privilege. So I think, of course, there is that segment of Gen Zs that they fully understand. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I don't think they're that impacted yet because they don't fully understand it. And, to be fair, I have a lot of research into this. Side note, I also look at what VCs, what private equity is investing in. That gives me an idea where the money is going. This is just out of personal interest, nothing to do with the book. So obviously Gen Zs, they've just graduated and they're starting to hear about AI. And I think at the moment they're just enjoying using AI, becoming a YouTube influencer. And to be fair, of course, that's become a legitimate career path, right? YouTube, TikTok. But yeah, I'll say that they probably fully haven't grasped yet what's coming.
You see, what I'm noticing is, and reading from your book, AI has been here. So why do you believe so many people are still talking about AI as a future problem when your book suggests that it's already happened? See, your book deviates from what I can say is the mainstream messaging that's being sent out there in mainstream kind of media. So
Appreciate.
you've identified a number of aspects of where the entry level jobs have been given to AI
Mhm.
work, and
Yeah.
many people are still expecting it to happen. When you describe how it's already been happening, how do you
Yeah.
explain that?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. I mean, whoever is thinking that it's yet to come, they should just look at the unemployment stats.
Right,
They should actually look at, more importantly, they should look at the number of layoffs. Literally, the most recent, I forget the name that it's, your, like what we have, the Office of National Statistics, you have something I forget.
labor
And they
statistics,
released,
right? Yeah,
right, and they release
yeah.
this every quarter, I believe. And the latest one, it's actually already higher than COVID. And COVID was temporary. So this is why I say that. I mean, I don't know if someone's thinking that it's yet to come. What's yet to come is just more of this.
Yes,
But you wouldn't have this level of layoffs. You wouldn't have this level of unemployment. And in fact, more so, like the thing is, look, this is a can of worms, the unemployment number, because people have been fired for reporting a high unemployment number. And now, they're reporting something, then it's always revised downward. I think, yeah, I mean, and also just a side note, over the last 2 years, if you look at the stats, most of the employment was coming from the government. And now, obviously, even the governments have started to employ AI. So, yeah, I don't know if someone's thinking, honestly, I'll say like that's a very complacent place to be at if you're thinking that it's still not here.
well, if what's the biggest misconception people have about why entry level jobs are disappearing from what you can tell?
Again, I mean, if someone's still thinking, well, I mean, the biggest misconception would be that there are still the same number of jobs and the opportunities
Right.
and the career prospects that it was 2 years ago. I'm talking about for Gen Zs. I would
Yeah.
say that is the biggest misconception if someone's still thinking it's the same. Because look at any stat, right? And I know stats can be biased in some way, but then, yeah, you look at unemployment, you look at the number of layoffs, and even if you look at what's happening on the stock market, when companies announce layoff, the first thing that happens is their stock price goes up because this coveted revenue per employee, which, the big seven like Facebook, Meta, their revenue per employee was in like 150, like six figures easily. Now it's just gone up even further. So the stock price appreciates at the back of it. So yeah, I mean, I'll say that it's here already. It's not going to arrive in the
No,
future.
you're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. Very well said. So, if you had to explain the problem in a sentence or two to a graduating senior, what would you tell them?
The first thing is forget even what your degree was about. You first look up the industries or sectors you were thinking, or let's say look up the jobs that you were thinking of applying for, and look at what might happen in a year and 2 years, and then decide. That is step one, is look at the job and the prospect. And step two is then try to find something that matches your interest. What I said, at the start.
I hear you. I'm trying to figure out, when someone has graduated with a particular major and they're focused and dedicated on finding a position in that field, when does it, what signs then, what would you tell parents, or what would you tell them about what's going on? And if there's an extended period of time, because we know, you mentioned that when people are not finding something in their field, they're shifting in a different direction, I imagine.
Mhm.
So what would you tell someone who's dead set on, I graduated in whatever field, engineering, law,
Yeah.
marketing,
Look, I mean,
sales?
yeah, if you're dead set, then use a cliche like where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm not saying that the paralegal job has vanished, right? I mean, there are still jobs available, but earlier it might be one out of, let's say, per application, per job, you would receive 150 applications. Now it's probably 400. And the worst part is, or the most difficult part is for these, the Gen Z, is a lot of this, even qualification of their resumes, is taking place through AI. So it's not just by yeah, you
Yes.
have to fight. If you're that determined, all right, mate, go all out, keep applying, because whether in a day, in a week, in a year, you'll find something. Then you decide whether it's worth it, right? Is it the smartest use of your time and resources? That's a different question.
Well said.
Yeah.
What's the danger for someone if they're waiting for the market to return to what it used to be? Because, the job market shifts and it goes in cycles. You've talked about this being much different than others. If you can ring the warning bell, what would it be to those listening? How waiting for it to return the way it used to be, what would the
Yeah, I
cost of
mean,
that be?
yeah. Look, I don't want to be a scaremongerer, right? Yeah.
No,
So
you're
I
presenting reality facts. I mean,
yeah.
that's
The first thing I'll say is, if you're waiting, look, I mean, option one is, so you asked me that what might be one of the fear, like you said, that maybe a lot of Gen Zs don't realize what has happened. So if you really, really
they're in
think about
denial.
what,
We call that
in denial,
denial.
let's say.
I'm
Yeah.
just That's the reality. There's a
Yeah,
grieving
sure.
process that they're going through.
Yes. So I'll say this. Okay. You know what? Forget what you hear in the media, forget stats. You try it, give it a try, apply for jobs. And based on actual feedback, you pivot, right? You literally, if you are applying, 50, 70, 100 applications and you're not heard on something, maybe, you question whether is this working. So you ask me, if they just waiting, what would I say to someone who is just waiting for things to revert back to normal? I think, not to sound crude, you'll be waiting forever, because I don't think it's ever coming back to how it used to be. And look, to be fair, like, yeah, why do you're living in the past, right? To these Gen Z, I'll say, like, yeah, we'd all love to, some romanticize some aspect of the past, but, we're here and now, and they have to work with what they have.
No, this is exactly what I'm trying to demonstrate, to illustrate to young people and parents. You're not being cruel. You're being straightforward, given some facts, the research that you've done, the data you've collected. So if the first rung of the ladder is gone, what becomes the new first rung?
Yeah. So I think that depends on the job. So, for example, let's take another example, like, let's say, accountants. So typically, you would start off as an entry level accountant, and you would really start out with tasks such as bookkeeping. Now, if you're using, let's say, QuickBooks, QuickBooks is quite popular there. And do you guys have Zero?
I'm not familiar with that.
Zero. Okay, QuickBooks, you know QuickBooks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So QuickBooks is obviously, one of the most popular accounting software. 70% of the bookkeeping, like it can actually analyze transactions, it can read receipts. A lot of that bookkeeping aspect has already been carried out. So if you really think about it, like let's say someone who has a degree in bookkeeping and they start applying for bookkeeping jobs. Again, we're back to like I would think, okay, wait, what is the one level higher? One level higher would be preparing company accounts, preparing, processing payroll. Because payroll has a massive human element, apart from the big sort of, let's say, Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000 companies, payroll is still largely manual process, right? Because you can't really afford to make mistakes when calculating salaries and bonuses
Yeah.
and time off. So, maybe think about, yeah, learn a couple of, carry out a couple of courses, get some certification in payroll, and then maybe, yeah, that would be the next rung, I'll say. So I think we have to be very nuanced to that. Okay, yeah, entry level, but that's a very broad term, entry level. I would really drill down into, okay, in this industry, what is the entry level job and what is the next one higher?
So, how should young people? I appreciate hearing that. That's so important to understand. So, how should young people think differently about internships, freelance work, or side projects and/or volunteer experiences?
Mm.
How should they approach that?
I think volunteering is still massively important because, in fact, that is, I'll say, a relatively easy way to gain a competitive advantage. Because, especially if you're applying for companies with certain, let's say, uh, I don't know if you guys have it like investors in people accreditation, best places to work, you have that.
Mm,
So, a company which has the best places to work accreditation, they'll also look for employees that have a similar value. So as in, if you have volunteering, that's a bonus. It's
mm.
immediately, all other things being equal, setting you apart from the competition. I think internships is another way, which is a very, in fact, actually, you've asked me this question a few times. And in fact, now what I'll say is probably if I had to say which entry level job is still existing, it's internship. That is it. Because actually, that's a great way to get your foot in through the door, demonstrate your capability, and then you'll then, when when that's turned into full-time employment, that'll be the new entry level rung, which is one level higher. So I think those are still important. Yeah.
No, I'm glad you're bringing that up and you're reemphasizing that. That's great. Are portfolios becoming more important than resumes, from what you can tell?
So portfolio, as in like the work you've done before.
Yeah, like you talk about someone who was not able to find a position somewhere looking, and they were able to take AI or take whatever
Yeah.
methodology that they're using to present. They've posted it, you said, and they were seen, they were noticed, and then they
Mm.
found something, or they developed their own business. What do you say for that as far as
Yeah, I'll
portfolios
say,
are?
and that's a great question. I will say that portfolio, as you put it, or let's say past experience, is very important because that is another way you can demonstrate your expertise. So again, coming back, I think the first step is always you shortlist a couple of industries that you want to go after, that you think that they're least disrupted by AI. And then perhaps if let's say even if let's say you want to work with law firms, use AI to create something of value for a law firm and start promoting it. It could be an app. I mean, now it's so incredibly easy to build
Yes.
apps through Lovable, through these platforms. It could be an app. It could be a video. It could be even things like video campaigns. I know someone, he is 20, yeah, Gen Z graduated. What he did, he used uh, AI to create we have something called housing disrepair. I don't know. Do you have it? Do you know what I'm talking about? Housing dis. So basically in the UK, if you are renting a government flat, it's notorious for disrepair. Basically, there's a mold in the roof and it's not being repaired. And believe it or not, even though it's been let out by the government is very slow to say the least. So he created a series of these videos which housing disrepair solicitors, like lawyers, could use. And then he was promoting that. And I thought that was very clever because, yes, you're using AI, you've created something, you're demonstrating that you know this industry. Because his his degree was also in like something similar, like probate or something. So I thought that was very relevant, and that's very creative. That's very innovative. This is going back like a month and a half. I don't know if he's found a job, but he did get some one-off work that he told me. So I think that's a great way to use AI to, yeah, to
So
showcase your
that's a
skills.
one. You're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. You can find Pivot Point Strategy for Change on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like a deeper dive into the work we explore on the show, I invite you to visit my Substack page, where I share in-depth articles and reflections. Wonderful story. That's encouraging. It's inspirational. It's active. It's doing. I guess what I'm concerned about all the time with young people is that they're sending resumes out. As you know, AI is responding to them almost immediately that they don't fit the bill. They don't fit the criteria. They're getting discouraged. They're getting overwhelmed. They're also getting to the point where it's beyond frustration, perhaps depressed and anxious. Parents are feeling similarly, and they've spent an excessive amount of money here in the United States. College costs have just skyrocketed, and colleges are not preparing students, it seems, for the kind of work that's out there already. How much responsibility rests with the colleges in adjusting their curriculum or what they're selling? Because they're continuing on this old model, and everyone here is expecting, and they're being told, go to the great college, pay whatever you have to pay, or go to the city or state college, pay whatever those costs are if it's more cost effective. But there'll be something for you when you get out. That's not happening at the present time. So how much responsibility do actually colleges have in now adjusting what they're providing to meet the demand of young people in the workforce?
Well, I'll say colleges have a massive responsibility because they are ultimately educating the future generation. And what I have seen is, as an outsider, I think colleges are no different than an organization, a corporation, in that there are corporations which are very innovative. They're always looking at the trends in adopting it, evolving. So you have some universities and colleges that are doing this. And then you have others that, either because of lack of foresight or lack of resources, they haven't quite updated their curriculums. So I think, yeah, I mean, and again, if you're thinking about college, then of course it makes sense to look at who has the most up-to-date courses and curriculum. But if you've just graduated, there isn't much you can do about that, right? But what you can do is, again, I come back, like, the advice, let's say, whether it's the student, the Gen Z, or whether it's the parents, I think that the simple thing is, if you are applying and you're not getting results, only you can realize that, okay, I'm doing this, it's not working. No one can come and handhold you, well, your parents can, and tell you that, look, this is not working. But at one point, it's like someone smoking. You can tell them all you want, don't smoke. At one point, it has to come from within. Only then is it sustainable.
Yes, well said. Your book talks about skills, projects, distribution, and reputation. Tell us why those four.
So if you think about, like, the pillars, if you will, I would mention those. In fact, it was skills, reputation. Remind me,
projects and distribution. Yeah.
Yeah. So skills, again, to state the obvious, skills. In fact, I'll say the number one requirement is skills, right? Because when I say skill, I mean it, future skills. Like, really, do you have something today that your employer will need tomorrow? I think that is more valuable than what the employer needs today. So if you can go and demonstrate that, look, I can do this, and the way things are going, that is what you would need. Distribution was more another word for marketing, right? Spreading your message. Projects is, again, what you called portfolio. Right. Just some experience, formal or casual, in-house or, somewhere else. And then reputation is, again, think like reputation. In fact, I'll say more like branding, because that is another thing. In fact, if I had to give another advice in terms of where I think you can stand out, it's by creating a personal brand. That is much more challenging to replace than a corporate brand, a business. So I think that's another big one that, build a brand, start a blog, get active on LinkedIn, start a website, do things. I mean, it's never been easier to actually be creative. And you know what the irony is? A lot of people don't do this. It's always been the case. You want to get ripped, you know what to do, but how
Yes.
many people actually do it? So I think even that's in some way you have it easier because still a lot of people read about it, but they will not actually pick up, like, sign up and really try
And
it. It's like
and
social
do it.
media.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
Scrolling,
I'm
just
so
scrolling.
glad I'm so glad you bring this up, Shirish, because what you're talking about is actually doing something, not staying depressed, not becoming overwhelmed,
Oh, yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
dejected, not
Mm,
withdrawing, not avoiding, not making up excuses. This is the aspect of the work that I tend to get, and the clinicians that I know and work with, they get those calls about this is what's happening. He just finished from this
mm,
very high prestigious college, the universities, and he had a good internship. He keeps getting rejected. He's withdrawing. There are other addictions that go into place, let's say with
mm.
gaming or gambling and
Right.
betting these markets, these prediction markets,
I
or
hear.
even substances. So when that starts to kick in, and there's a level of avoidance, that's when parents start to feel helpless and worried, depending on how severe something has happened.
Mm.
Which of those four pillars do you believe young people struggle with the most?
Struggle with the most, I will say, reputation.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that next. So why is reputation becoming more important than credentials?
Because, well, the reason, firstly, I'll answer like the reason
Yeah,
I think they struggle is simply because they haven't had much time, right? They haven't had much time, you know, largely for a typical like recent grad, university has been, you know, partying and of course
party.
working, but yeah, good times and fair enough, right? So you haven't had enough time to build that reputation, to get your name seen, get known for something. And that's another thing I'll say now, increasingly, networking, who you know, has become ever more important than what you know. Because again, it's AI and robots still can't replace the one to one, right? I know X, and at the back of that, I was able to give or get Y, for example.
So how can a 22-year-old build evidence of some value before someone hires them? You can tell us more about that.
So you mean like practical, like specific ways?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, one is, let's say, LinkedIn, right? Get active on
Good.
LinkedIn, big time, because even these AI systems, right? They are taking LinkedIn data into account. And side note, Microsoft owns LinkedIn. Microsoft is one of the largest shareholders of OpenAI, ChatGPT. So it is no surprise that it is pushing its agenda. So you want to get active on LinkedIn. That is the first thing I'll say. The other thing is what we talked about earlier. Every time a new AI app is launched, you should be thinking, how can I use this to accomplish X, Y, Z? Find a job, stand out, get known, be seen, be heard, right? And the amazing thing is these apps, relatively speaking, are still very inexpensive. If you think about what they're providing, I actually think it's actually really inexpensive at the moment. So there is no excuse. So that's another thing I'll say. Become so put so much stuff out there that you start getting inbound, you start getting known. And I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but hey, you've got to start somewhere, right? Like,
No, you've got to say that.
you
They've got to
start
hear it.
this.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. 1 year down the line, you'll be very glad you started. So, yeah.
What opportunities do you think are hiding in plain sight right now?
Do you mean industries or?
Yeah, opportunities for young people or industries. Yeah.
So I think that there are some industries that they may not have had thought of. But I mean, of course, like for example, quantum, right? So the next evolution of AI, as from what I understand from what I've read, is quantum computing. Now, the good thing is if you've actually got a degree in engineering, it's relatively easier to pick up on quantum computing than actually if you graduated with a engineering degree in, like, let's say, like HVAC. So I think that is one. Another one, if you actually, another, just digress for a second. If you one of the few leading indicators of the job market is which type of companies are hiring. So you can actually go to Indeed, you can go to a couple of these sites, and you can actually look at what type of industries that are hiring. So I think, yeah, there are some that, for example, health, climate, that's a big one, climate tech. And these are not sort of industries, they may typically think of. So I'll say definitely those are something to consider.
I appreciate hearing that. I think there is a lot of things that are out there that young people are not thinking of. Where do you think Gen Z has an advantage than older generations?
They grew up with this stuff. It's in the
Right.
DNA.
No, this is encouraging. That this is important for them to hear. Tell
Yeah,
us more about that
absolutely.
because
I think big advantage is they've grown up with this stuff. If they start, let's say, learning a new AI tool, they will pick it up exponentially faster than the older generation. And that also means because your learning curve is so shorter, you can actually really test out a lot of different apps for different purposes. And then, like we talked about earlier, you keep putting stuff out there. It's like the advice you give to one of my friends is a musician, and he always said this, that when the first advice is don't try to get your song perfect in the beginning, it's just volume, keep putting out songs, getting feedback, improving based on feedback. You'll never produce a first hit. Your first is almost never going to be a hit. So yeah, that's what I'll say to them. Like, they've grown up with this and it's second nature to them. So yeah, that's a big advantage that they have.
no, that
And
that's
and the
something.
other thing is, in fact, just one more thing is,
Yeah,
I think the Gen Zs that are growing up now, they're actually much more conscious and aware at that age than, the older generation. And for example, even alcohol consumption amongst Gen Z is one third of what it was 20 years ago, right? So that's great because it means you're much more present, you're much more alert, and you have more brain power to use. Similarly, I think they're also much more mature for their age than we were. So I think they have all of this going for them. So actually, yeah, it's much, if you actually really put your mind to it, it's not that difficult.
I like hearing the way you presented it because there's a level of refusal to accept certain things that they're so used to. Young people are so used to hearing what they don't do well, and they need to recognize what their
Mm.
strengths are. And so when you bring that to the forefront here, it's very important for them to hear. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Do you see a rise in things like imposter syndrome or failure to launch narratives as structural rather than individual issues? Do you see it impacting a larger number of Gen Z people compared to just
So
those
do you
few?
mean, yeah? So let's say, for example, mental health issues,
Yeah.
identity
Well,
crisis. That's
uh, imposter syndrome being where they don't feel qualified or
yeah.
they feel like okay, and then it prevents them from taking the initiative and launching their careers and then it cripples them. Do you see that? Do you find it more as a whole hitting this generation?
To be honest, I'm not so sure about imposter syndrome, but I will say because of social media, the one negative aspect of social media has been, generally speaking, for Gen Zs, making them question who they are, making them feel they're not as worth,
Right.
because you're just looking at the best parts of the people on social media. So I think part of it might be different. I think different people will process those insecurities differently. I think
Yes.
imposter syndrome is one. Identity, like questioning, who am I? And then most importantly, feeling you don't add up because you're seeing all these sort of glamorous, pretty people on social media
Yes.
living the
Well said.
most luxurious lives. So I think that can definitely can do a number on them. Yes, I will say, nothing is without its like both, always two sides to everything. Social media is great for certain things. I think not so much in this. And their brains haven't fully, I think, even evolved to realize that, what, this is just like I'm just looking at that shiny apple and not everything that's behind it.
Yes. No. Well said. So let's just bring this a little further for the individual. If you're a graduating senior today with no clear path, what's the first 90-day strategy you would recommend? Let's say you've graduated, you've sent out resumes. What?
The first thing I do before I make a single application is, okay, this is the degree I have. Let us first spend a few days evaluating what is the career prospects here. And I would really make a list of KPIs, such as, let's say, how many jobs are being posted for this versus others. So you have a reference point. And what I would also do is, let's say for the degrees in engineering, pick maybe two industries that are very similar. So engineering and technology. let's say, but then pick a couple which are completely different, HVAC and skilled tradesmen. That will give you a very good reference point, as in, okay, what's happening? That is one. The other thing is use different AIs. You've got like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. Each
Hmm.
of them actually has a personality. Each of them are looking at different data sets. And Gemini uses obviously Google. The Claude is using Brave and ChatGPT is using Bing. So actually, I do this like you literally when you're analyzing what's out there, like use all three to see that okay, what is the prospect. And I would really, yeah. So you asked me first 90 days. I think the first couple of weeks, because it can take a while, right? It can take a while. Like the first couple of weeks, I would just sit down and be like, okay, this is the degree, but put aside the fact that I must have a job here. Let's first identify what is the prospect here. And then yeah, I mean, if you are, like I said, if you just graduated with a degree in HVAC, that's actually great because a lot of Gen Zs are now moving to skilled trades. That's great. But of course, like we talked at the start, I think maybe if you think that your prospects are not, it's not as great as it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Don't be scared to pivot because ultimately you have to find a job where there is an opportunity, right? Doesn't matter, like I said, what you would like to do. Is like, is there an opportunity there? So I think, I mean, 90 days, yeah, I mean, I think maybe you won't need that much time, but the point is be very well prepared before you start spending time creating applications, sending it out there, because yeah.
Do you think, thank you for putting that in perspective. I think that's so important for others to know. They want to know what to do right when they're done, and that gives them
Mm.
a pathway and something to conceptualize. Are there industries quietly still building traditional ladders that people are overlooking?
Very good question. And yeah, one that comes to
Uh,
mind is healthcare.
okay,
So the age span, the life expectancy is increasing. And actually, one of the industries that is not only hiring, but actually it's on a short skills list is actually for the
mental.
older elders,
Okay.
healthcare. Yeah. You're aware of that? Is
Yeah,
that
I
what
was
you're going to
waiting for
say?
you to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. So that's great. I mean, and literally it's almost a seller's market. If you don't even have to have a degree. I mean, I don't know if there's an actual degree in carer. I think you need to have obviously some skills and certification in being able to take care of the elderly, but actually it's relatively straightforward. So I think that is very much intact. And in fact, it's growing. Health, like home care, elderly care, outpatient care, that's actually a growing sector. So yeah, if you've got a degree somewhere that you like, actually world hasn't changed for you really. In fact, it's become better. So yeah, that is one that comes to mind.
You also in the book mention mental health treatment,
Mhm.
counselors,
Yeah,
therapists. So I was
yeah,
glad to see that. And
big
although,
time.
yeah, talk a little bit about that in greater length, if you can,
Yeah,
about that industry.
absolutely. And I'll tell you that that is another one, which what I noticed, this is even before the book, need for mental health professionals, mental health has been on the rise for the last decade. And I think I'm no expert, but and you are, but I think it all started, or let's say it was exacerbated because of social media, because things were largely sort of, even up until the days of social media, right? And now it has massively exploded. And I think it's only going higher because you said this, you've touched on this. They're very depressed. And Gen Zs are they were already a bit like a certain like certain percentage of population were depressed because of identity crisis or imposter syndrome, but now it's because of you're like 25, 27, no job prospect. Like you said, your parents have spent six figures on education and you're living in your parents basement, right? I know it's a cliche, but it's true. I mean, it
But it
happens.
is true. It
Yeah,
is true.
yeah.
And I'm not talking about the ones who are smoking weed or substances or
No,
gambling.
no,
I'm talking about
absolutely.
really industrious children who
Yeah.
really want to find work and are actively looking that care, and they're highly anxious because of that. But go ahead. I just want to
Yeah,
highlight
no,
that.
and the
Yes.
thing is, the ones you're talking about, the ones who are smoking weed and like high, they're not depressed at all because they don't know what's going on. They're too high to be taking stock of reality and knowing that, like, look, I should be a bit worried. Yeah, you're right. You're talking about the ones they are depressed because they've been making so much effort.
Yes.
And yeah, and absolutely. It just so I touched on this earlier, like private equity and VCs, they're actually investing a lot into, so you might have heard of companies like Teledoc, and you've got
Yes.
Talkspace,
Yeah.
LifeStance, and massive, like they're receiving a lot of funding because even your United Health, the number one expense that they have, insurance payouts, is actually for mental health counseling. So, these Gen Zs, they're requiring even more so because of, what we discussed. So coming back, yes, I think that's another sector which is just growing in need because of unemployment now, and just being very disheartened because they're not able to find a job.
Thank you for putting that in perspective and highlighting you know, because we're talking about forward facing positions, right? Directly service
Right.
positions,
Yeah.
which you mentioned in the book. Certainly they can work with some type of an app to enhance their, to maybe to do journaling or to do something.
Mm.
But the relationship is what changes for someone. It's the therapeutic alignment. So the rapport that's built, regardless of what therapeutic approach they use, whether it's CBT or
Mm.
any other approach. So that's important to understand. And I'm sure you're referring to nursing and hospital, any kind of hospital work. So
Yeah.
question about, I want to, if companies eliminate junior talent today, who becomes tomorrow's leaders? That's always been on my mind.
You still have that workforce. It's just shrinking.
Mm,
Right? So I'll say it's just the people who remain, the people who are still standing. Obviously, yeah, the workforce is shrunk, but they're still, some of them will go on to become the leaders of that company. So yeah, I mean, I think we're a long time away from, let's say, a company being only robots, right? I don't know if in our generation. I mean, of course, it's possible. Yeah. So yeah, you still have people who are in the company and yeah, bound to sort of, lead from within, basically, I'll say.
So before we move towards closing, I want to ask you personally, what pivot point experience did you have that impacted you professionally, let's say, or
Yeah.
personally that impacted you professionally? No, that's usually the
Yeah.
case.
So my day job, my main business is my agency. Now, so it's a marketing agency, and we actually work with finance, with law, with HR. And believe it or not, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I actually, in fact, I might go as far as saying I was not depressed, but I was very worried
Right.
about AI eating our lunch. Because even before AI came onto the scene, automation and they didn't call it AI, but automation and smart technology that Google was rolling out was already being used to automate Google Ads campaign. And that was a large part of our revenue. Google Ads management, managing paid search campaigns. There was a time a year and a half ago, I was very worried. But we've never done better. Like literally these first couple of quarters was some of our best for our business revenue wise. And that is largely because of the way we have incorporated and adopted and embraced AI. So I'll say that was the biggest, like, again, it wasn't a drastic pivot in that, like, from marketer to something else, but within the organization, we now use AI very heavily, and it has helped us massively increase customer satisfaction, massively improve the results. And I was really staying away from it the first year and a half. So I'll say, yeah, that was one
So can
that
I
comes
just
to mind.
put that in perspective for you? I appreciate hearing that. There
Mhm.
is a level of awareness that you had perhaps emotionally, cognitively. And when you embraced that, you stepped out of the level of denial. You
Mm.
might have touched upon a level of depression, maybe some anger. You might have bargained with yourself in the industry saying, why does this have to happen to us? What can we possibly do? This is something that we weren't expecting. Why me? Why me? Why the industry? What's going on here? The moment you accepted that and you said, let's work with it, you probably turned to your team or whoever works with you and you came up with an active plan and a solution.
Mm.
So you addressed it head on and found that by not rejecting and denying it, by reaching a level of acceptance and then enabling you to reach in and come up with a very creative methodology to then move forward with it, it brought you to another level. I'm sure
Mm.
that inspired you. And I'm sure what inspired you to write the book was all the things that you've been seeing going on. And I just want to compliment the work that you've done to bring this to light, because this is something where I'm noticing is not being talked a lot about in mainstream. And I just say mainstream media or in publications,
Mm.
really. And I think there's a level, personally, I believe, companies, governments, there's a level of wanting to suppress certain amount of information and funnel
Mm.
it out slowly so they can control the narrative in order not to overwhelm and cause more anxiety and more depression in others, and hit the industries and where they are going to be impacted. So Shirish, this conversation has cracked something open for me, and I think it will do the same for a lot of other people listening. Parents wondering how to guide kids into a market they don't recognize, and young adults wondering if the ground under them will ever feel solid again. I want to thank you for bringing this kind of clarity and courage to the conversation. But I want to tell you what struck me most is that you didn't come at this with any easy answers. You came at it with the kind of honesty that comes from having actually set aside the problem and addressed it, not just studied it from a distance, and that's rare. And I think anyone listening who's been quietly worried about a Gen Z arranged child, or quietly worried about themselves, just got something more useful than advice. They got permission to stop pretending they have it all figured out. And I want to also highlight, you gave language to something a lot of us feel but rarely say out loud. And this isn't about fixing Gen Z, and it isn't about parents getting it wrong either. It's about the two generations trying to find each other across a gap neither of them built on purpose. You didn't flinch from that complexity, and you didn't try to simplify it into something tidy just to make the conversation easier. I think that's exactly why it worked. And I walk away from this not with a checklist, but with a different way of seeing the whole picture. And I have a feeling I'm not the only one. So before I let you go, I want to say thank you again, genuinely, for trusting this space with something that clearly matters to you, and it shows.
Yeah, no, not at all. Look, it's been a pleasure. And yeah, thank you for having me. And most importantly, I really hope your listeners have, they have something to work with. Just one thing I'll say is job job losses, it's always been the case, right? Going back to the Industrial Revolution. I don't think, if you really want to put a positive, but not complacent, is that, yeah, it's always been evolving. You just need to up your game. I mean, Gen Z is, you're young, you've just finished university. I mean, it couldn't be any easier for you in a way, in that, imagine if this happened to you when you were 50 or 60, right? So yeah, it's just, you have to pivot, like you say, your pivot point. It's all about that. Like, life is all about pivoting and progress and, taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
So I like the way you put that, and that's an important aspect that is missing for many young people. I think they tend to get bombarded by a lot of negativity, and they come down on themselves a little too hard. And when they can hear that it is encouraging, especially from someone like yourself who's done the work itself and is in the field and has written about it, I do want to extend the opportunity down the road. If other things come up, I would love to have you come back and talk a little bit more about things.
It'd be a
pleasure. As it happens. This Gen Z focus that I've been doing has been something that I will continue to do on an ongoing basis at different aspects, because I like visiting it at different times throughout the next coming years. So I imagine that what you will have to say will be extremely useful once again to talk back about it.
All right, I look forward to us speaking again. Yeah.
Thank you, Shirish Agarwal. Thank you very much. His book is Gen Z to Gen Zero. Thank you very much for speaking on Pivot Point Strategy for Change. To everyone listening, if any part of this conversation landed for you, if something Shirish said made you sit up a little straighter or feel a little less alone in what you're navigating, that's not an accident. That's the whole point of sitting down with people who've actually lived through the thing we're all trying to make sense of. Change doesn't arrive because someone hands you a 5-step plan. It arrives the way it did today, in a conversation, as a feeling first, then a thought, then eventually something you act on. So I leave you with the one question I like to ask at the end of every episode. Think about it. What's your pivot point? What's your pivot point?